Move her, Dr. Victor Hale said, barely looking at my wife. She's not the priority. My wife, Elena, was bleeding through the sheet on the gurney. I grabbed the metal rail. She's dying. Hale's eyes shifted past me, toward the private entrance. A senator came rolling in surrounded by men in suits, awake, angry, clutching his shoulder like the whole hospital belonged to him. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for updates. One nurse whispered, her pressure's dropping. Hale snapped, prep or two for Senator Calloway. I looked from Elena's pale face to the politician waving away a paramedic. You're taking surgery from her, I said. Security stepped between us. Sir, back up. Then Elena's fingers twitched against mine. That was the second I stopped asking. I shoved a rolling cart into the operating room doorway, dragged Elena's gurney inside and locked the door. The pounding started immediately. Then came another voice from outside. Federal investigators, open this door. I stood frozen, my hand still on the lock, while Elena's monitor screamed behind me. 30 minutes earlier, I was just Desmond Grand, a warehouse supervisor trying to keep my wife conscious in the back seat of our car. Elena had collapsed at dinner, one hand pressed to her stomach, whispering, something's wrong. By the time we reached St. Bartholomew Medical, nurses were already rushing her toward emergency surgery. One of them looked at the scan and went pale. She needs an OR now. Then Dr. Hale arrived. He didn't ask Elena's name, he didn't ask how long she'd been bleeding. He glanced once at the chart, then looked over his shoulder as sirens pulled into the private ambulance bay. That was when the senator arrived. The whole hallway changed. Administrators appeared, security doubled, nurses who had been moving fast suddenly waited for permission. I said my wife was here first. Hale adjusted his gloves. This is a hospital, not a line at a grocery store. Elena's monitor beeped faster. A young nurse leaned close to me and whispered, she needs surgery now. Hale turned his head and she immediately stepped back. Security reached for my arm. I looked at Elena, then at the operating room, then at the senator being wheeled toward it. So I moved first. The cart slammed across the doorway, the lock clicked. Hale pounded from outside, open this door, Mr. Grand, or your wife's blood is on your hands. Then the second pounding came. Federal investigators, open immediately. The lock rattled so hard, I thought the entire door would split open. Behind me, Elena's heart monitor stuttered into an uneven rhythm. I turned back to her, blood stained the side of the bed now, dripping onto the floor beneath the gurney. Her skin looked almost gray under the operating lights. Hey, I said, grabbing her hand, Elena, stay with me. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Outside, Dr. Hale shouted over the pounding, he's unstable, get security in here now. But his voice sounded different than before. Less controlled, less arrogant. Nervous. I looked at the door. The federal agents kept yelling for access, and suddenly Hale stopped threatening me and started arguing with them instead. That was the first moment I realized this night wasn't only about my wife. A memory hit me hard enough to make my chest tighten. 2 hours earlier, Elena had been sitting across from me at our kitchen table trying to smile through the pain. You should have stayed home, I told her. We already missed enough work this month, she said quietly. She'd been dealing with cramps and dizziness for weeks. Every clinic visit ended the same way, stress, hormones, dehydration. One doctor barely looked up from his laptop before handing her another prescription. But tonight she dropped her fork mid-sentence and slid out of the chair. I still remembered the sound of her hitting the floor. Back in the operating room, I squeezed her hand harder. I froze once already, I whispered, not again. Years ago, my younger brother died in a hospital hallway after doctors delayed treatment during a shift change. I'd stood there doing nothing while adults in scrubs told me to calm down. I was never doing that again. A metallic bang sounded behind me. A side supply door cracked open, and the young nurse slipped inside, breathing fast. You shouldn't be here, I said. I know. She rushed to Elena, bedside, checking monitors with shaking hands. What's happening to her? The nurse looked at me for 1 second too long before answering. She has catastrophic internal bleeding, her scans were clear, she should have gone straight into surgery. The words hit like a punch. So why didn't she? The nurse swallowed hard. Because before the senator even arrived, administration told us to clear the operating wing for him. I stared at her. You're saying this was planned? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she grabbed supplies and started hanging fluids herself. Outside, voices erupted again. Then the lights flickered once. The nurse looked toward the ceiling, suddenly terrified. They're overriding the lock. The door mechanism clicked loudly. Before it disengaged, she leaned close to me and whispered, "You don't understand what that man is trying to hide." The operating room doors burst open. Security rushed in first, followed by hospital administrators in suits, 2 federal investigators, and Dr. Hale pushing through the middle of them all like he still owned the building. "There he is," Hale snapped, pointing at me. "This man interfered with emergency care and endangered hospital staff." One administrator immediately added, "We have witnesses saying he barricaded the room." I looked at Elena as another alarm sounded from her monitor. She was bleeding to death while you treated a politician with a shoulder injury. "Watch your tone," Hale barked. But people were already recording. Patients from nearby rooms stood in the hallway holding phones. Nurses whispered to each other behind the investigators. The entire floor felt seconds away from exploding. One of the federal agents stepped forward. "We're here regarding an active investigation involving Dr. Victor Hale and the Callaway Medical Foundation." At the mention of the foundation, Hale's face tightened. The senator's chief aide moved quickly between them. "Senator Callaway requires immediate transport. This is completely unrelated." Then the young nurse spoke up from beside Elena's bed. "No," she said shakily, "it's not unrelated." Every head turned toward her. "She needed surgery first," the nurse continued. "Her scans showed severe internal bleeding over 20 minutes ago." Hale stared at her in disbelief. "You should think carefully before speaking again." The nurse's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. She was removed from priority after the senator arrived. The hallway erupted with overlapping voices. The investigators immediately demanded access to patient records. Administrators tried stopping them. Security argued with agents. And through all of it, Hale kept glancing toward the senator's aide instead of Elena. That's when I realized he wasn't worried about losing a patient. He was worried about losing control. Another doctor stepped out from the crowd, a senior surgeon with silver hair and tired eyes. "She's correct," he said flatly. "Mrs. Grand should have gone into surgery immediately under protocol." Hale spun toward him. "Stay out of this. You already crossed the line, Victor." Phones lifted higher around the hallway. Hale's calm mask finally cracked. "You have no idea what's at stake here." Right then, Elena's monitor dropped into a violent alarm. The room changed instantly. The senior surgeon moved toward her bed. "We're out of time." One investigator pointed directly at Hale. "You are no longer authorized to make treatment decisions tonight." Hale stepped forward furiously. "You can't do this." "We just did." Nurses rushed Elena's gurney back into motion while another surgical team flooded the room. As they pushed her past me, one federal investigator stopped at my side. "Mr. Grand," he said quietly, "did your wife ever participate in one of Dr. Hale's charity diagnostic programs?" The question stopped me cold. "Elena went to one," I said slowly. "About 6 months ago, free women's screening downtown." The investigator exchanged a look with his partner. "What did they tell her afterward?" I tried to remember. "They said everything looked normal." Behind us, the operating room doors slammed shut as Elena disappeared inside. The investigator lowered his voice. "Mr. Grand, we believe records from that program were altered." My stomach dropped. He pulled out a tablet and showed me a file stamped with Elena's name. According to the hospital records, she'd already received follow-up treatment months ago. Except none of it had happened. Wrong appointment dates, fake signatures, billing approvals for procedures she never received. "That's impossible," I said. "It's fraud," the investigator replied, "and your wife may be one of dozens." The hallway around us spiraled into chaos. Administrators rushed between offices carrying boxes of files. Nurses whispered in corners. Security guards argued with federal agents near the elevators while news crews started appearing downstairs after videos from the hallway spread online. Then I saw Dr. Hale again. Not surrounded by authority anymore. Cornered. An investigator was questioning him near the nurses' station while the senator's chief aide hissed angrily into a phone nearby. That's when another piece clicked into place. Hale hadn't delayed Elena just because the senator was important. If surgeons opened Elena up tonight and documented the rupture, investigators would immediately see her condition should have been caught months earlier during the foundation screening. Elena wasn't just a patient. She was evidence. The young nurse approached me carefully. I almost stayed quiet, she admitted. You saved her. She shook her head. Dr. Hale destroyed people who challenged him, nurses got transferred, doctors lost recommendations, everyone learned not to question him. Further down the hall, voices rose sharply. One investigator held up a folder. These billing dates don't match patient admissions. Another answered, start securing digital records now. A hospital executive suddenly shoved past them toward a computer station. Federal agents intercepted him immediately. Everything was unraveling in real time. Then a senior investigator walked over to me with a grim expression. Mr. Grand, I need to be direct with you. I stood up slowly. If your wife dies tonight, he said, this investigation could become criminal homicide through medical neglect. The words hollowed out my chest. Hours earlier I was worried about hospital bills. Now I was sitting outside an operating room surrounded by police officers, reporters, and federal agents while my wife fought to stay alive inside. And somehow Dr. Hale still wasn't done fighting for himself. Across the hall, he pointed directly at me while speaking to investigators. This entire delay happened because he barricaded the operating room. I stared at him in disbelief. Even now, he was trying to bury Elena under his own mistakes. For one horrible second, I thought it might work. Then the operating room doors opened. The surgeon stepped out, exhausted and sweating through his scrubs. He looked directly at me. Your wife survived, he said. Then his expression darkened. And we found something else. The hallway went silent. I stepped toward the surgeon so fast a security guard instinctively moved with me. What do you mean? I asked. The surgeon pulled off his gloves slowly. Your wife had extensive internal damage that should have been identified long before tonight. This rupture didn't come out of nowhere. One of the federal investigators immediately spoke up. Can you confirm that medically? Yes, the surgeon said firmly. There were warning signs, repeated ones. He looked directly at Dr. Hale when he said it. That was the moment Hale stopped looking untouchable. An investigator opened a folder and began reading aloud right there in the hallway. Fraudulent follow-up appointments billed under patient names. Forged physician approvals. Insurance claims filed for procedures never performed. Every sentence seemed to drain more color from Hale's face. The investigator continued, we've now connected over 200 altered patient records to the Callaway Foundation program. The senator's chief aide tried interrupting, this is outrageous. Save it, another agent snapped. Everything finally connected in my head. Elena's scans months ago probably showed warning signs, but acknowledging them would have exposed the fake treatments and fraudulent billing operation tied to Hale and the senator's foundation. So Elena got ignored. Then tonight became a disaster Hale couldn't control. If surgeons operated immediately, investigators would see the truth in her records before Hale could contain it. That's why he pushed her aside. Not because she wasn't important. Because she was dangerous. I looked at Hale, you let her bleed to protect yourself. Hale opened his mouth but no words came out. Federal agents moved beside him. One agent said, Dr. Victor Hale, your medical license is being suspended pending criminal investigation. Another added, you are under arrest for obstruction, fraud, and reckless medical negligence. The hallway exploded with camera flashes. For the first time all night, Hale looked small. Not powerful. Not respected. Just terrified. Hours later, I finally saw Elena in recovery. Machines still surrounded her, but she was alive. When her eyes opened halfway, she looked at me weakly and whispered, "You stayed." That broke me. I'd spent the entire night forcing myself not to fall apart, but hearing those two words shattered whatever was left holding me together. I grabbed her hand carefully and nodded. "Yeah," I said, my voice cracking, "I stayed." The young nurse visited later that morning, still shaken. "I thought they'd fire me," she admitted. Instead, investigators asked for her statement 3 separate times. By then, more staff members had started talking too: doctors, nurses, billing employees. Years of silence collapsed overnight. Within days, videos from the hallway spread everywhere online. At first, news stations called me the man who barricaded an operating room. Then the investigation details came out. The recordings, the altered records, the footage of Hale removing Elena from priority care while the senator was wheeled past her. The narrative changed fast. People stopped asking why I locked the door. They started asking why I had to. Senator Calloway resigned less than a week later after leaked messages showed his office pressured the hospital to prioritize him that night. Multiple hospital executives were removed after investigators uncovered special treatment policies for wealthy donors and political figures. Families began coming forward with stories that sounded terrifyingly familiar to ours. Delayed diagnoses, disappearing records, ignored symptoms. Lawsuits buried the hospital within months. And Dr. Hale, the man who once controlled entire operating wings with a sentence, lost everything. His license, his reputation, his freedom. Months later, Elena was recovering at home. Slowly. Some days were harder than others, but she was alive. We started receiving letters from strangers whose family members' cases were finally reopened because of the investigation. One afternoon, I drove back to St. Bartholomew before part of the surgical wing was demolished during the hospital restructuring. I stood outside the same operating room where security once threatened to drag me away from my bleeding wife. Workers were removing the department sign from the wall. Victor Hale's name came down last. I watched them carry it out in silence. Because the night they told me my wife wasn't a priority became the night their entire empire collapsed.